I still remember the scent of fresh croissants filling the car, the kind Lena loved from that French bakery on Hawthorne. It was raining, a light Portland drizzle, just enough to make the air smell like damp leaves and old pavement. I had gotten off work early, a small mercy from my creative director after pulling 3 all-nighters for a client pitch. I didn't tell Lena. I wanted it to be a surprise. Her birthday was 2 days away, but I thought I'd beat the calendar for once. Show up with her favorite pastries, a bottle of Pinot Noir, and maybe, just maybe, remind her that even after 7 years, I was still trying. The building was quiet when I pulled in. Ours was the corner unit on the 3rd floor, the one with ivy crawling up the side and wind chimes that never stopped singing. I smiled when I reached the door. The lights were off. She must have been napping, I thought. She did that sometimes after school, curled up with a blanket and a podcast. I fumbled with the keys, juggling the bakery bag and the wine, and quietly pushed the door open. Something felt off immediately. It wasn't anything loud or obvious, just a feeling, a flicker behind my ribs. The apartment was too still. No music, no hum of the dryer, no soft hum of her voice talking to students over Zoom. Just silence. I stepped in, letting the door shut softly behind me. The air was warm, the heat still on from the morning chill. I placed the pastries on the counter, then hesitated. That's when I heard it. Faint, like a whisper through walls. A sound I knew but hadn't heard in a long, long time. A moan. Not hers. Ours. Once. But not in months. Not since everything started to drift. My heart stuttered. My first instinct was denial. Maybe she was watching something. A movie. Maybe she wasn't alone because a friend stopped by. Maybe. God, maybe. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. I walked down the hallway slowly, my footsteps soundless on the old hardwood floors. The bedroom door was almost shut. Not quite. Like it had been left that way on purpose. Like they didn't expect anyone home. I didn't knock. I didn't clear my throat. I just pushed it open. And there they were. Lena, my wife. Her back arched, hair clinging to the sweat on her neck, head thrown back in a moan I hadn't heard directed at me in over a year. Caleb, my best friend. His hands gripping her hips, eyes closed, completely immersed in the moment. They didn't see me, not right away. It was the mirror on the closet door that betrayed me. Caleb shifted, his eyes opened, and in that reflection he saw me standing there, frozen, silent, holding a bottle of wine like some pathetic romantic comedy cliché. He stopped. Everything stopped. Lena's eyes flew open. Her body froze mid-movement. Her breath caught in her throat. "Ethan!" she gasped, voice thin, like air escaping a balloon. I didn't move. I couldn't. Caleb scrambled, pulling the sheets over himself, stammering words I couldn't hear, or maybe just didn't want to. Lena looked like she'd been dropped into cold water, shocked, pale, ashamed. I stepped back. Still, I said nothing. Lena slid off the bed, reaching for the robe that hung on the doorknob. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice breaking. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd fallen in love with during a rainy poetry reading in college. The woman who once told me she couldn't imagine a life without our shared Sunday mornings and inside jokes. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear, or maybe guilt. I couldn't tell. "You were supposed to be at work," she said. I blinked, slowly. "Surprise." Caleb stepped forward, one hand raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Ethan, man, I swear, I didn't mean for this to happen." I tilted my head, almost amused by the stupidity of that sentence. "Didn't mean?" My voice came out calm. Too calm. "So what? You slipped and fell into my wife?" He flinched. "Good." Lena's eyes were glassy now, panic setting in. "It's not what it looks like." "Lena," I said, my voice flat, empty. "It's exactly what it looks like." She moved toward me. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. She stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock above our bookshelf, counting seconds that stretched into a lifetime. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said. "And yet," I replied, glancing around the room, "here we are." I looked at Caleb then, my best friend, the guy who helped me move into this very apartment, who stood next to me on my wedding day, who toasted our love with a grin and a wink. His face was pale, lips pressed in a tight line, hands trembling at his sides. "You were my brother," I said. "And you knew. You fucking knew." "I didn't plan it." "Stop talking," I snapped. "Don't insult me with lies on top of betrayal." Lena was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked small, fragile, a version of her I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I still love you." That broke something in me. I laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You don't get to say that, not now." I turned, walked out. The hallway felt longer than it had ever been, the front door heavier, the rain colder. I left the wine, left the pastries, left everything that used to mean something. I don't remember how long I sat in my car. Minutes? Hours? The bakery bag fogged up against the windshield. My hands were shaking, but I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Not because I was strong, but because the pain hadn't fully settled in. It was still rising like water behind a dam, and in the quiet roar of my thoughts, a single truth cut through. They chose this. Now, I would choose what came next. I didn't know if it would be revenge, or silence, or disappearance, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Nothing would ever be the same again. The first thing I did was drive. No destination in mind, no plan, just the road, the rain, and the weight of what I'd seen still clinging to my skin like a fever. Portland blurred past the windows, gray skies, wet sidewalks, a city that seemed to mourn with me. I didn't go back to the apartment. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself heading west into the trees, toward the cabin in Forest Park where my parents used to spend weekends when life in the city got too loud. It had been empty for years. Just dust, old wood, and silence. Exactly what I needed. I stayed there that night, and the next, and the next. At first, I told myself I just needed space. A few days. Time to think. But what started as escape quickly became exile. I turned off my phone, left my laptop in the car, didn't answer emails, texts, or the dozen missed calls from Lena that came in before I shut everything down. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. I wasn't ready to remember how it used to sound when it still meant something. The days bled together. I slept at odd hours, ate only when my stomach twisted hard enough to remind me I was still alive. I drank too much coffee in the mornings and too much whiskey at night. I'd wake up with headaches and hollow eyes, not from hangovers, but from the dreams, the same goddamn scene replaying over and over. The bedroom, her moan, Caleb's reflection in the mirror, that single frozen second when the world I'd built collapsed under its own weight. People say betrayal is a sharp pain, like a knife between the ribs, but that's not how it felt. It was slower, heavier, like drowning in something thick. It didn't stab, it suffocated. I tried to write. I opened a blank document once, stared at the cursor blinking like it was mocking me. The words wouldn't come. They used to pour out of me. Advertising copy, short stories, even little notes I used to leave for Lena on the fridge. Got your oat milk, love you, don't forget your umbrella. Now, even a sentence felt like a mountain. Some mornings, I'd sit on the porch, wrapped in my father's old flannel, listening to the wind move through the trees. I remembered how I used to come here as a kid, building forts out of branches, believing the forest could hide me from everything bad. And for a moment, I wished I could go back, not to childhood, just to the version of me that still believed in people. What hurt most wasn't the sex. It was the trust, the intimacy that came before it, the 1,000 quiet choices that led to that one afternoon, the fact that it wasn't a mistake. They'd been making that choice over and over again, in silence, behind my back. Lena didn't just cheat. She shared pieces of herself that used to belong to us. The inside jokes, the tender mornings, The sighs after long days. She gave those to someone else, to Caleb. And him? My best friend. The guy who helped me move 3 times without complaining. The guy who held my tie on my wedding day while I fumbled with cold hands. The guy who once drove 6 hours in the middle of the night because I thought Lena was having a miscarriage, turned out to be a false alarm, thank God, but he came without question. Now I couldn't even picture his face without wanting to break something. I replayed our friendship over and over, trying to pinpoint the moment things changed. Did I miss a sign? A look? Was it me? Was I too consumed by deadlines, pitches, the job that slowly drained the color from my life? Did Lena try to reach me and I just wasn't listening? But no amount of distance excuses betrayal. That's the thing about vows. They're not conditional. They don't expire when the spark fades or when life gets hard. And maybe we had grown apart. Maybe I had been tired, distant, but I was still showing up, still buying her favorite croissants, still planning birthday surprises, still trying. She stopped trying. I think that's what finally broke me. After the 4th day, I went into town for groceries. The girl at the counter asked how I was. I lied. Said fine. She smiled and handed me a paper bag filled with frozen meals and overpriced blueberries. It was the first real human interaction I'd had in days, and it felt like someone trying to speak through a wall of water. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not my coworkers, not my parents. I figured word would spread eventually. Caleb and Lena couldn't keep it secret forever, especially not if they were still together. I didn't even know if they were. I didn't care. Or maybe I did. Maybe that's why I kept refreshing their Instagram pages when the signal was strong enough. No new posts, no clues, just absence, the kind of absence that eats at you. One night, maybe the 5th or 6th, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Lena and I at Crater Lake, Caleb holding a sparkler at our 4th of July barbecue, the 3 of us at a jazz club in New Orleans, drunk and laughing, unaware of how close we were to the edge. I watched those photos like they were a movie about strangers who looked like people I used to love. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, because I didn't feel anything at all, and that scared me. On the 7th night, I stood in front of the mirror, shirtless, tired, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked at myself. Not really. The man staring back wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He just looked gone. Like someone who'd stepped out of his own life and forgotten how to get back in. That's when I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but I couldn't go back either. Not to the apartment, not to Portland's routines and the ghost of our shared life. I needed something else, a crack of light, a voice that didn't sound like a lie. I didn't know where to find that, but I knew I couldn't find it alone. I hadn't planned to leave the cabin that day. The rain had stopped for once, but the sky was still hung with low, moody clouds that made everything look like it had been soaked in quiet. I woke up late, skipped breakfast, and stared at the ceiling long enough for the light to change on the walls. Around noon, I grabbed my keys and drove, not because I had anywhere to go, but because sitting still had started to feel like suffocating. Portland has a way of feeling too small when your world collapses inside it. I ended up in the Alberta Arts District. I don't remember choosing it. Maybe something in me was chasing color, movement, the illusion of normal. The streets were lined with murals, little boutique shops, and coffee houses that always smelled like fresh espresso and wet concrete. I parked on a side street and started walking with no direction. That's when I saw her. She was standing across the street, one foot on a bench, camera pressed to her eye, hair tied back in a loose knot like it had been thrown up without thinking. A denim jacket, black boots, a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. She was focused, completely lost in whatever she was trying to capture. I almost walked past her. Almost. But then she looked up. Haley Reed, Caleb's younger sister. The last time I'd seen her was 2 Christmases ago, standing in Caleb's parents' living room, holding a glass of red wine and laughing at something Lena had said. She'd always had that kind of laugh, the kind that made other people smile even if they didn't know why. Back then, she'd been finishing art school in Chicago, quiet, a little sarcastic, always observing more than she let on. Now, here she was, in Portland. with a camera and a stare that landed on me like it had been waiting for this exact moment. "Ethan?" she said. I stopped. "Hey," I managed, surprised by how rough my voice sounded. She crossed the street quickly, lowering the camera, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. "God, it is you. I wasn't sure at first. You look like shit?" I offered with a half-smile. She tilted her head, assessing. "Different." "Fair." There was a beat of silence, and then she asked, "You okay?" It was a question that held too much weight, too many layers. I could have lied. Said, "Yeah, I'm fine, just out for a walk." But something in her face made that feel wrong. Maybe it was the way her eyes softened, like she wasn't asking to make conversation. She really wanted to know. "No," I said quietly. "Not really." She nodded like she understood, like she'd heard that answer before. "You want coffee?" I did, more than I realized. We ended up at a small cafe tucked between a record shop and a bookstore. The place was warm, filled with hanging plants and soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. We found a corner booth, ordered black coffees, and sat facing each other like two people meeting again in a city neither of them quite belonged to anymore. She didn't ask right away. About Caleb. About Lena. I appreciated that more than I could say. Instead, she asked what I'd been working on. I told her nothing. She asked if I was still at the agency. I said no, not really. She didn't push. She told me she'd moved to Portland 6 months ago, said she finally got tired of the long winters in Chicago, and that the light in Oregon was better for her kind of photography, natural, messy, unfiltered. She shot mostly portraits now, freelance work, musicians, couples, weddings, and more recently, a boudoir series she was curating for an art show. Her voice lit up when she talked about it. Not flashy or arrogant, just real, like she'd found something that made her feel alive. And I realized, somewhere between her second sip of coffee and the way her hands moved when she described her last shoot, that I felt something shift. Not a spark, not yet. Just a quiet awareness. A pulse in the silence. She was beautiful. She always had been. Not in the loud, obvious way, but in the way the world felt different when you looked at her too long. Her eyes were sharp, thoughtful. Her mouth had a natural curve like it was always on the verge of smirking. There was confidence in the way she sat, in the way she listened, and there was something else, too. Kindness. The kind that doesn't rush you to be okay. At one point, I caught her watching me too closely. She didn't look away. "You disappeared," she said softly. "Yeah. No one knew where you went, not even your parents." "I needed to get out." "I figured," she said, "but I didn't expect to run into you here." "Me neither." We talked for almost an hour, about movies we both hated, about a podcast she was obsessed with, about nothing important and everything that mattered. But we didn't talk about them. Not that day. Not yet. When we stood to leave, she hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small card, her business info. "If you ever want to talk," she said, handing it to me, "or if you just need someone who gets what it's like to hate your brother right now." I took it. Our fingers brushed. Something passed between us. Warmth. Tension. History we'd never fully lived. "Thanks," I said. She smiled, a little tired, a little hopeful. "See you around, Ethan." I watched her walk away, the rhythm of her steps slow, unhurried. She didn't look back. When I got back to the cabin, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the card on the counter. Haley Reed, freelance photographer, storyteller, troublemaker. I didn't call her that night, or the next. But the silence in the cabin started to feel different. Not lighter, but less empty. And for the first time in days, I slept without dreaming of the mirror. I didn't reach out to Haley for 3 days. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what I wanted from her. That hour at the cafe had felt like something I wasn't ready for. Too real, too easy, too soon. I told myself I needed more time, more space. But really, I was afraid of what it meant to feel anything again, of what it meant to let someone new into the ruin I'd become. On the fourth day, I caved. It was raining again. Of course it was. Portland didn't seem to know how to stop. I sat at the tiny desk in the cabin, staring out through fogged glass, watching pine trees bend under the weight of water. My fingers hovered over my phone for a long time before I typed a message that felt safe. "Hey, that photography show you mentioned still happening this weekend?" She replied within minutes. "Saturday night, 7 p.m. Alberta Street Gallery. Come if you want. No pressure." I stared at that last line. No pressure. I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, caught between looking like I cared and looking like I hadn't crawled out of a grief-ridden cave. In the end, I threw on a dark jacket, clean jeans, and boots that didn't look too worn. When I walked into the gallery, the first thing I noticed was how warm it felt. Not the heat, though it was crowded, but the warmth of people, of voices and laughter echoing off high ceilings and white walls. Photos hung in clusters, black and white, soft and sharp, human and haunting. Then I saw her. Haley stood near the back, talking to a tall woman with short silver hair and a camera slung across her chest. She was wearing black, simple but elegant, with a thin gold chain at her throat and her hair swept up in a loose braid. She looked centered, like someone who belonged. When she saw me, her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. Maybe longer. "You came," she said, walking over. "I said I would." She smiled. "You didn't, actually." "Right," I said. "Well, I meant to." We stood there for a moment, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the coffee shop and this. Then she gestured toward the nearest wall. "That one's mine." It was a portrait. A woman, seated on a stool in a sunlit room, bare-shouldered, freckles visible, her eyes closed, a soft smile tugging at her lips. It felt vulnerable, but powerful. Real. "She looks safe," I said quietly. Haley nodded. "That's the point." We wandered through the rest of the gallery together. She introduced me to a few fellow artists, let me pour us each a glass of cheap red wine from a makeshift bar near the back. Conversation was easy, easier than it should have been. I found myself laughing, really laughing, the kind that shakes something loose in your chest. After an hour or so, the crowd began to thin. The rain had picked up outside, and people were making a break for their cars. I turned to Haley. "Want to grab a drink somewhere quieter?" She hesitated, then nodded. We ended up at a dim bar 3 blocks down. Brick walls, Edison bulbs, a vinyl record spinning old soul music somewhere behind the bar. We found a booth in the corner, far from the door, and settled into the quiet like we'd earned it. "I forgot what silence with someone else could feel like," I said after a while. She looked at me over the rim of her glass. "What does it feel like now?" "Not heavy." She held my gaze. "That's a good sign." We talked about stupid things, childhood stories, the time she tried to run away at 13 and only made it to the end of the street, the first photo she ever took, of a dog peeing on her dad's car tire, about how I once wrote a short story about a man who couldn't stop dreaming of the woman he'd never met, and how Lena said it made her cry. The name slipped out before I could stop it. I froze. So did she. "You don't have to," she said softly. But I did. Because for once I didn't want to pretend anymore. "She was different," I said. "Before? Or maybe I was just blind. But things changed slowly. Little cracks, fewer touches, less laughter, more distance. And I thought if I just held on long enough, it would come back." "And Caleb?" she asked, barely a whisper. My throat tightened. "I don't know when it started, but I saw them, together, in our bed." She flinched. I looked away. I didn't say anything, just left. It was like the world folded in on itself. and all I could do was walk out. She reached across the table and touched my hand. No words, just warmth. "You didn't deserve that," she said after a long pause. "I'm not perfect. No one is," she replied. "But there's a difference between flaws and cruelty." I nodded, staring at her fingers on mine. I hadn't been touched like that in weeks, not since before it all fell apart. And it wasn't even romantic. It was just human. We left the bar sometime after midnight. The rain had slowed, but everything shimmered under the streetlights. We walked without speaking, side by side, shoulders brushing now and then. When we reached her car, she turned to me. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said. "Me too." Her keys dangled between her fingers. She looked at me, then down, then back up. There was a pause, long enough for something to hang between us. "I don't do casual," she said quietly. "Not well." I swallowed. "Neither do I." Her hand touched my chest, just above my heart, my breath caught. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she whispered. "I'm not trying," I said. "Then kiss me like you mean it." And I did. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't messy. It was slow, full of everything we weren't saying, full of questions and tentative answers. When our mouths parted, when our foreheads touched, there was a silence that didn't feel empty anymore. She smiled, small and tired and real. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Haley." As I walked away, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. This didn't feel like revenge. It felt like something I'd forgotten I could still feel. Hope. It was 2 days after that kiss when everything cracked. The first sign came in the form of a text. Short, sharp, no punctuation. "You're with my sister?" I stared at the message on my phone for a full minute before locking the screen and tossing it face down on the counter. The words buzzed through me, static and heat. I didn't answer. I didn't even think about answering. What would I say? Yes? It's none of your business? After everything you did, you don't get to ask me anything? Instead, I stood at the sink, filled a glass of water, and tried to steady my hands. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the old wall clock and the distant hum of wind outside. I could still feel the memory of Haley's mouth against mine, the weight of her hand on my chest, the way her voice had lowered when she said, "Kiss me like you mean it." I had. God, I had. But now the past was knocking again. I didn't reply to the text that night, or the next morning. I let it sit there, unanswered, like a live wire in the palm of my hand. Then, that afternoon, he showed up. I was walking back from a quick grocery run, just a bag of essentials, enough to last the weekend, when I saw him leaning against my car like he owned the damn thing. Same leather jacket, same hands shoved into his pockets. But he looked different now. Tired, jaw clenched, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. I slowed my steps but didn't stop. My heart was already hammering, but my face stayed calm. Cold. "Ethan," he said when I was close enough. "Caleb. We need to talk." "No," I said, shifting the bag in my arms. "You need to leave." He straightened. "I'm not here to fight." Could have fooled me. "I texted you." "I saw." And you don't get to ask me anything," I said flatly. "Not after what you did." His mouth tightened. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." "There it is," I said, laughing once, bitter and short. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "Your favorite line." He stepped forward, voice lower. "I didn't come here to rehash the past. I came because Haley's involved now, and that changes things." "You're only saying that because you're scared it might be real." "It's not real." I dropped the grocery bag onto the porch, turned, and walked right up to him. "Don't tell me what's real. You have no authority, not anymore." "She's my sister," he said, almost pleading. "She's not your property." "She's being used." That stopped me. Cold. "Excuse me?" "You're not with her because you care," he said. You're with her because you're angry, because you want to hurt me, and maybe Lena too. You think I don't see that?" I stepped in close, so close he had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. "Let me be very clear. I didn't plan this. I didn't go looking for Haley. But she showed up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. So no, this isn't revenge. But even if it started that way, you forfeited the right to be outraged the moment you touched my wife." He looked away, jaw twitching. "She came to me," he muttered. "Lena, you two were falling apart, and she needed someone." "So you stepped in?" I said. "As what? Comfort? A savior? Don't flatter yourself." He didn't reply. I picked up the bag from the porch, turned my back to him. "This conversation's over. She's going to get hurt." That one stopped me at the door. I turned halfway, just enough to say, "The only people getting hurt here are the ones who chose to break what wasn't theirs. If Haley ends up wounded, it won't be because of me. It'll be because she had the bad luck of sharing blood with someone like you." He didn't follow me inside. I closed the door without another word and stood there for a long moment, my pulse thundering in my ears. Later that night, I told Haley. I met her at her apartment just outside downtown. It was small, but filled with light. Exposed brick, shelves lined with cameras and prints, plants draped across every ledge. She wore a black hoodie and leggings, her hair up, face bare. Beautiful, but distracted, like she already knew something was coming. "He confronted me today," I said, after she closed the door behind me. She didn't act surprised, just leaned back against the wall and crossed her arms. "I figured," she said. "He's been texting me, guilt-tripping, accusing, saying I'm letting you manipulate me." "What did you say?" "I didn't answer," she said. "Not yet." I stepped closer. "He thinks I'm using you." She laughed once, dry and humorless. "That's rich? From him?" "He says I'm doing this to hurt him, to hurt Lena." She didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the floor like it held all the answers. Then finally, "Are you?" The question didn't sting. It just settled into the room like dust. "I don't know how this started," I said honestly. "Maybe a part of me did reach for you because I was drowning, because you were something familiar and untouchable that suddenly wasn't. But that's not what this is now." She nodded slowly. "I believe you." But he's my brother," she said. "And even though I hate what he did, I know what this looks like to everyone else. I don't care what it looks like." "I do," she said, voice cracking. "Not because of them. Because of me. Because I need to know that if I fall for you, really fall, it's not just because you've got nowhere else to land." I moved to her, gently took her hands. "You're not the fallback," I said. "You're the first thing that's made sense in a long time." She looked up at me, eyes bright and afraid. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," I whispered. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't fall into bed. We just sat on her couch, close but not touching, letting the silence speak louder than anything else. Outside, the rain returned, soft against the windows. Inside, something stronger was forming. Not revenge, not guilt, just the beginning of something that might survive the fire. Haley told me she needed to talk to him. She said it on a Wednesday night, her voice quiet but unwavering, like she'd rehearsed the sentence a dozen times in her head before saying it out loud. We were sitting on the floor of her apartment, backs against the couch, an unfinished bottle of red wine between us. The record player hummed low in the corner, but the music felt far away. "I have to say it to his face," she said. "Not for him, for me." I didn't argue. I didn't tell her it was a bad idea. I just nodded, even though every part of me braced for the fallout. She met Caleb the next afternoon at their parents' house in West Lynn. Neutral ground, she'd called it. Familiar enough to keep the conversation from spiraling into screaming. Distant enough from the wreckage to keep it from catching fire again. I didn't go. She asked for space, and I respected that. I spent the day cleaning the cabin, then messing it up again, trying to keep my hands busy. I went for a run, made coffee I didn't drink, started a book I couldn't finish. The minutes moved like wet sand, slow, sinking, endless. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, I was standing on the porch with a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Haley's car pulled up, headlights dimmed. She stepped out slowly, quietly, and closed the door with more care than usual. Her shoulders were tight, her jaw set. She looked like someone who'd been through something. When she came inside, she didn't say anything at first, just kicked off her boots, walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "How'd it go?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She took a sip, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "He tried to play the victim, said you and Lena were already falling apart. Said it wasn't love, it just happened." I didn't respond. I'd heard those words before. I'd memorized the way they sounded. "I told him that wasn't an excuse," she continued. "I told him she was still your wife, and he was still your best friend." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp, tired. "I told him I saw what it did to you, that I felt it." I stepped closer. "What did he say?" "He tried to turn it on me," she said. "Said I was throwing away my family for something built on ashes, that I was letting myself be used." "And what did you say?" "I told him I'm not a pawn in his guilt. I told him I love you." The words hit me with a force I wasn't ready for. I blinked, my chest tightening. "You... what?" "I love you," she said again, softer this time. "And it's not revenge. It's not some dramatic escape from our past. It's real, Ethan. It scares the hell out of me, but it's real." I crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into me. Her arms wrapped around my waist, her face pressed into my chest, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. We just held on. "I love you too," I whispered into her hair. We stood like that until the silence grew full. Then I leaned back just enough to look her in the eye. "What else happened?" She hesitated. "I told him I'm done," she said finally. "Done pretending that what he did was a mistake and not a choice. Done pretending our family isn't cracked all the way through. Done keeping peace that doesn't exist." I saw the weight of it in her expression, the cost of that choice. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Not really, but I will be." That night, we didn't make love. We didn't rush to celebrate the declarations we'd both just made. Instead, we lay in bed, wrapped in sheets and silence, trading soft touches and whispered things that had nothing to do with the people we used to be. Her fingers traced the scar on my shoulder from a bike accident in college. Mine curled behind her knee, where I'd once seen a tattoo now faded into memory. It wasn't about sex, it was about closeness, truth, choosing to stay, even with the ghosts still echoing around us. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Haley didn't speak to Caleb. She needed space, and she took it. I gave her whatever she needed. Sometimes that meant long walks around Forest Park. Other times, it meant just lying beside her while she stared at the ceiling, working through the fragments of a brother she no longer trusted. Things between us only grew stronger. We fell into something that didn't feel like rebuilding, but something new entirely. Wednesday nights, she cooked. Thursdays, I drove her to photo shoots when her car acted up. We started collecting things, little inside jokes, shared playlists, mugs from cafes we liked. One morning, I found her brushing her teeth in my old t-shirt, barefoot on the wood floor, humming a song I hadn't heard in years, and I realized I'd stopped waiting for the pain to come back. Then the silence ended. Friday afternoon. My phone buzzed as I was locking up the cabin. A message from Caleb. "You and I aren't finished." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked inside, sat on the couch, and waited for Haley to get back from her shoot. When she did, she looked radiant, hair tousled, cheeks flushed, camera strap still looped around her shoulder. She smelled like lavender and sun. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag by the door. I stood up slowly. "He texted me." She stiffened. "What did he say?" "That we're not finished." She exhaled, frustration darkening her features. "He doesn't get to decide that." "I know." She ran a hand through her hair, then walked toward me. "I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder." "Then don't." "I don't want him to ruin this." "He won't." She stopped in front of me, close enough for me to see the way her eyes shimmered in the light. "I want this to be ours, not built on them, not haunted by what came before." I took her hands in mine. "It already is," I said. She nodded, but there was still tension in her jaw, still a shadow in her gaze. "I need to know something," she said. "Anything. If your life hadn't fallen apart, if Lena hadn't done what she did, do you think we would have ended up here?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe not like this. Maybe not so fast. But I think I would have found you eventually. I think a part of me always saw you, even when I wasn't allowed to look." She leaned forward then, pressing her forehead to mine. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Then let's stop asking what if." I kissed her. Slow, certain. No more ghosts. No more halfway healing. This was our choice now. And we were done apologizing for it. For a little while, it felt like we had found something close to peace. Not the loud kind, not the celebratory kind. Just the kind you feel in the way someone's presence makes silence bearable, the kind you find in morning coffee that doesn't need conversation, in shared glances across a room, in the warmth of another person's skin against yours in the middle of the night. Haley and I were building something. She started leaving more things at the cabin, a second toothbrush, an extra hoodie, a pair of socks that always ended up in my drawer. I didn't ask her to bring them. She didn't ask if it was okay. We just existed beside each other until the space between us stopped feeling like space at all. I hadn't heard from Lena in weeks, not since the last time she called and I ignored it. She left a voicemail I never listened to, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I didn't feel the need to look back. Until she showed up. It was a Sunday morning, gray, as always, with a light mist hanging in the trees like breath that hadn't settled. Haley was still asleep, curled against me, her leg thrown over mine, her hair a mess of tangles and warmth against my chest. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, tracing the line of her spine with my fingertips, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breath. Then my phone buzzed. I reached for it on the nightstand, careful not to wake her. One message. "We need to talk. I'm outside." My chest tightened. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a shirt, and padded into the kitchen. I looked through the front window, and there she was, Lena. Standing on the edge of the gravel drive, arms crossed, wearing one of my old hoodies and jeans she used to steal when we lived together. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her eyes shadowed with something that looked like sleep deprivation or grief. Maybe both. I opened the door. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Lena, can we talk?" I hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. She walked in slowly, her gaze scanning the cabin like it was some echo of a life she used to own. Her eyes landed on the mug Haley had left out, the camera on the side table, a hair tie on the doorknob to the bedroom. I didn't hide any of it. "She's here," Lena said. "She lives here," I answered. She nodded, like that was some kind of confirmation she'd been bracing for. "That was fast." "No," I said, folding my arms. "It wasn't. You just didn't notice how slow we were falling apart for the last year." She flinched but didn't deny it. Instead, she sat on the edge of the couch, her posture uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she belonged on it anymore. "I'm not here to cause a scene," she said. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I stayed standing. "For what?" "For all of it," she said. "For not being honest, for letting it get that far, for not stopping it when I could have." I didn't reply. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy, and I could see how tired she was, worn down in a way I hadn't seen since the miscarriage. There was no makeup on her face, no armor. "I left him," she said. I blinked. "Caleb?" She nodded. "Weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered." "It doesn't." "It does to me," she said quickly. "I thought you should know that I didn't choose him over you. I chose wrong, but not him." I let that hang in the air. She stood, then walked slowly toward me. Not close enough to touch, just close enough to be seen. "I still love you," she said. I didn't respond right away. My gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted back to her face. There was a time when those words could have undone me, when they would have cracked open something buried and painful and made me question everything. But not anymore. "I'm in love with Haley," I said. Her mouth opened, then shut. She swallowed hard. "That's his sister, Ethan." "You slept with my best friend in our bed," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. "We're well past worrying about etiquette." She stepped back slightly, wounded. "You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said. "I'm doing this because she sees me, because I don't have to beg to be understood, because when I'm with her, I don't feel like I'm constantly failing." There was a long silence. She looked at me with something that wasn't anger this time. It was sadness, pure and plain. The kind that comes when you finally understand what you've lost and know it's never coming back. "I miss us," she whispered. "I miss who we used to be. We're not them anymore." Just then, the bedroom door creaked open. Haley stepped out, wearing one of my t-shirts, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but alert now. She froze when she saw Lena standing in the living room. Lena turned slowly, taking in the sight. "Oh," she said. "Well, that explains a lot." Haley didn't say anything. She folded her arms, jaw tight, calm but unreadable. "Didn't realize we were expecting company," she said finally. "I didn't come to fight," Lena said, lifting her chin. "I came to talk to my husband." "Ex-husband," Haley said evenly. "Not yet." The room pulsed with something heavy and sharp. The tension was electric, unspoken but unmistakable. Two women who knew too much about the same man, standing on opposite sides of a wound that would never fully close. Lena looked at me then, waiting, hoping. But I said nothing, and in the silence, she understood. She walked to the door slowly, paused with her hand on the knob, and turned back one last time. "Just remember who was there when you built this life," she said. Then she left. The door shut softly behind her. Haley exhaled and leaned back against the wall. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly. "She's still in love with you," she murmured. "It doesn't matter." "It kind of does." I pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "You overheard everything?" She nodded. "Every word." "I was going to tell you. She just showed up." "You don't owe me an apology for her showing up," she said. "But if I'm going to be in this with you, I need to know where your heart actually is." I didn't hesitate. "It's with you," I said. "It's been with you for a while now." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, but I could feel it. That subtle fracture. The question still lingering in her eyes, unspoken but real. Sometimes the past doesn't need permission to haunt the present, and sometimes love alone isn't enough to silence every echo. Some endings don't come with slammed doors or final words shouted across a room. Sometimes they just fade, quietly, like a storm that passed in the middle of the night while you were asleep. You wake up to wet ground, heavy air, the echo of something violent that's already gone. But it still leaves a mark. That's what the weeks after Lena's visit felt like. Not rage, not heartbreak, just a soft, strange stillness. She didn't reach out again. Neither did Caleb. Whatever conversations they had beyond me and Haley, I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Whatever apology Lena had come to offer, it wasn't for me anymore. And whatever regrets Caleb had, they were his to carry alone. The damage had been done. The fire had passed. And now we were left with the ashes and the choice of what to do next. Haley moved in not long after. Not because we needed to prove anything, not even because she couldn't stand being in her apartment anymore. She just started sleeping over more nights than not, leaving shoes by the door, her favorite coffee on the counter, film rolls in the fridge next to my eggs. And then one day, we stopped keeping track of whose space it was. It just became ours. She kept her studio downtown, filled with morning light and exposed brick and all the chaos that made it hers. I started taking fewer freelance gigs, finally stepping back from the grind that had hollowed me out for years. I picked up part-time consulting work, just enough to keep my hands busy without burying myself again. We built a new routine. Haley would wake early, stretch like a cat across our bed, then disappear to chase light and faces with her camera. I would make coffee, read the news I didn't really care about. Sometimes I wrote, slowly, hesitantly, like the words were learning how to trust me again. Other times, I just sat on the porch, breathing. We talked more, too, about everything, not just the past, but the weird little details we'd never thought to share when this whole thing began. She hated olives. I secretly loved reality TV. She used to think I was intimidating when we met years ago at a holiday party. Too quiet, too calm. I told her I used to wonder what it would feel like to kiss her even back then. We laughed a lot. And somewhere in the middle of all that quiet, something real began to take root. Then one Saturday, the world reminded us that peace was still a fragile thing. We were at a farmer's market on the outskirts of the city, weaving through booths selling local honey and handmade candles. Haley was wearing a faded denim jacket, her camera slung across her chest, and I was sipping a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. We were mid-laugh, something about my terrible pronunciation of French cheese, when we turned a corner and ran right into her. Lena. She froze first. We followed a second later. She looked different. Thinner, softer around the edges. Her hair was tied back loosely, her face bare, the designer polish she always wore replaced with something quiet, casual. A simple pair of jeans, a worn flannel, the kind of clothes she used to mock when we first moved to Portland. Her eyes went from me to Haley, down to our joined hands, and back up again. "Ethan," she said, voice low. "Lena." She looked at Haley, nodded slightly. "Hi." Haley didn't smile, but she didn't let go of my hand either. "I just wanted to say—" Lena paused, exhaled, started again. "I'm sorry. For everything. For lying. For hurting you. For blaming you when it wasn't your fault." I didn't speak. I let her say what she needed to say. "I was lost," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "And I used both of you to feel less alone. I thought if I could blow everything up, I'd find something new inside the wreckage, but I didn't. I only found myself, and I didn't like what I saw." I nodded once. "Are you okay now?" "I'm trying to be," she said. "I've been seeing someone. Not like that, a therapist, someone who actually listens." Haley's grip on my hand softened slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness," Lena said, "and I know there's nothing I can do to fix it, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm sorry." I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger or pity, just distance, like the memory of her belonged to someone else. "You look happy," she said quietly. "Both of you." "We are," Haley answered before I could. Lena nodded again, slowly. "Take care of each other," she said. "We will," I said. And then she walked away. We stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. The air felt heavier somehow, like something unspoken had finally exhaled. "You okay?" Haley asked. I turned to her. "Yeah, I think I finally am." We spent the rest of the day like nothing had happened. sampling honey, arguing over which flowers were actually worth $12 a bundle, making fun of a candle that claimed to smell like Pacific Northwest soul. But the encounter stayed with me. Not because I still loved Lena. That part of me had died the night I walked into that bedroom and saw her wrapped around someone else. No, it stayed with me because of what her apology meant. It was an ending, a real one. That night, as we lay in bed, soft sheets, tangled legs, the hum of wind outside, I kissed Haley's shoulder and whispered into her skin. "You changed everything for me." She turned toward me, brushing my cheek with her fingers. "No," she said, "you let yourself be changed." I smiled. "I never thought I'd love someone again, not like this." She rested her forehead against mine. "I did," she whispered. "You knew?" "I hoped," she said, "but I knew the moment you stopped using me as a reason to stay angry." That was the thing about revenge. It burns hot, fast. It satisfies for a moment, but it doesn't heal. What we had now wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was honest. It was born in fire, but it survived in light. There were still hard days, moments when the past crept in, when Haley would grow quiet and distant after scrolling through an old family photo, when I'd wake up from a dream and forget, for a second, who I was lying next to. But those moments didn't break us. They reminded us of what we'd survived to get here. And slowly, the noise faded. Caleb moved out of state. Lena rebuilt her life in her own quiet way. And Haley and I? We began ours. No grand declarations, no performative perfection. Just a quiet daily promise. I see you. I choose you. And I'm not looking back anymore.